podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
And this is our weekly special series, Meaning Making 101, where we try to make sense of this crazy world and how we may change this world from the inside out, creating an awakening that ushers in the solution to the myriad existential crises we find ourselves facing as a species at this time. We call that the meta crisis. Yo, check. How we sounding?
Okay.
We working? Yeah. We live? All
Sorry,
right.
there was some cutouts there in the beginning.
Yeah,
and
fam, sorry
we're
about that. We had a late start today. We actually
Battling gremlins.
battling gremlins, man. We had some serious bugs in the setup this afternoon, getting everything rolling, but we are here. We got it. Rock and roll. Guys, we got a really intriguing subject tonight. We're actually going to kind of pick up where we left off last episode, where we introduced the concept of metamodernism. This is the phase that comes after traditionalism, then there was modernism, and then there's postmodernism that we've been going through, and now there's metamodernism. What is that exactly? Well, we're going to re-summarize that, and now today we're getting into the deep, profound subject of metamodern spirituality. So look forward to next episode where we'll be specifically going into metamodern Christianity. So I pulled up a couple videos for us to cover from Brendan Graham Dempsey's podcast, which we actually covered last episode as well. He's on the cutting edge of this movement. He's doing such good work out there. So I'm very happy to champion the work that Brendan is doing in the world. And the first video, he interviews a modern philosopher known as Layman Pascal, a part of the integral theory movement, along with Ken Wilber, among others. So, yeah, let's look into what exactly is metamodern spirituality.
So yeah, I'd be curious from your perspective if someone were to say, well, what does metamodern spirituality mean, and is it the same thing as integral theory? Is it just some postmodern cultural like fad or so yeah, metamodern spirituality. Give us your take.
Well, all those terms, they all have like an expanded version and like a minimal version. So I think the most inclusive way we can think about it is what are the minimal conditions for integral or the minimal conditions for metamodernism. And I think there's part of it is harder to find because it's an aesthetic, it's an ethos, it's an emergent spirit. If you didn't grow up in the last couple of decades, you probably don't quite understand how it's supposed to feel. But intellectually, it's a way of saying, hey, we understand there's a problem with modernism. There's also some virtues to modernism. We really agree with and need to get further into the postmodern critique of the modern. And we're aware that there's some things we left behind in traditional and indigenous societies, right? And both integral and metamodernism affirm these multi-paradigmatic approaches. Somehow going forward has to make sense of all those values, all those cognitive operating systems. So then you go, well, what does religion and spirituality look like in that context?
Okay. So he's using a lot of big terms here, guys, to simplify things, multi-paradigmatic. He's just talking about there's multiple different value sets or orientations, worldviews that people take on to look at reality. And we're looking for something that is multi-perspectival, as John Vervaeke would say. Because we can't live in that old postmodern story anymore. We need a new story to inhabit. We really need to breathe meaning back into the world and re-aliven our sense of the sacred.
Yeah, and I don't think we can do it by like the way what modernism did to traditionalism, like just critiquing it. We're going to go completely different. And the same with postmodernism. We're like, well, we're going to critique that and do it completely different. It needs to be.
Yeah, we're going to recognize where they went right and all of, the benefits or the good points or ideals that were set forth from traditionalism through modernism, through even postmodernism. We're also going to further critique those points that need to be critiqued of these different philosophical movements. I guess you would call them social philosophical movements. And these are whole, kind of like a zeitgeist, kind of like an entire worldview, a way of looking at the world and interrelating with the world. So, yeah, what are the minimal conditions to bring this about, what does religion and spirit look like in a metamodern context going forward to make sense of the values of all these different operating systems, these different paradigms, the multi-paradigmatic term that Layman used there. And so let's go ahead and kind of continue on a little bit here. How can it help? How can metamodern spirituality, in fact, help play a role in solving the meta crisis that we find ourselves in as a species? The meta crisis, of course, being the myriad existential or potentially life-ending crises that our species is now facing that are actually that compound upon one another. So it's not just like there's a bunch of different crises; they interact and build upon and exacerbate one another. And so that's the one big crisis is the meta crisis that we now face. And we got to get through this juncture if we want to have a beautiful future for our species. So let's go on.
And could it play a role in solving the emerging meta crisis or the accumulating number of crises that are anchored in modernism that we haven't been able to solve from any of these individual paradigms? When I look at that, Bruce Alderman invited me to be in the Foundation for Integral Religion and Spirituality. And one of the first things I started looking at there is, how do you define religion outside of just one of these paradigms? Because the notion that religion is a large, self-confessed belief membership group affirming a particular cosmology and symbol set, that's the traditional, what we'd call an integral amber or blue model. And modernism is happy to say, well, yeah, that's what it is. That's clearly what they're doing. And we're not doing that now. We've moved on. But that's never exactly what it was, because there were all these earlier stages and there's all these later stages in which a phenomenon similar to that can occur. So you got to really unpack that and go, hey, look, everything in traditional society is about self-professed belief membership groups around symbol sets. That's not specific to religion. Religion has got to be defined in a functional way that could show up in any of these different world spaces. What does that look like? Right. And to me, it looks like the attempt to create an interpersonal and intergenre resonant surplus in a cultural field. And when that works, the culture is religionizing. It gets some excess numinous feeling. It starts to undergo an apotheosis. It experiences itself as divine in some sense, based on the art of its day and the science of its day and the mysticism of its day and the politics of its day, all of that all together. And for me, that's the analog to the individual process of spiritualizing our experience, which is creating a resonant numinous surplus out of our individual subjective subsystems. So that's my general take.
I want to go to.
Okay. Hopefully that made sense, guys. I know Layman can be very, very creative with his linguistics. He's a challenging speaker, but he's just such a creative speaker as well. He does a great job of elucidating these ideas. I love the idea of coming together to create this sense of the numinous and living our lives according to that in a sense of fellowship with one another and how we can really ratchet that process up. We've kind of lost track of how to do that, haven't we?
Yeah, and you brought up the question, how do we define religion outside of these paradigms, like traditional, modern, metamodern, or any other paradigm that you're going to.
Postmodern, yeah.
So he did mention, looking at the ways we use, our professing alignment to something and the symbols that we use in the non-religious world. Like, if you look at like the political world, say like here in America, we got an elephant and we got a donkey, elephant, Republican, donkey, Democrat. We also have a bunch of other, smaller symbols. Like you'll see like the Punisher skull, for those guys that usually support cops, but are kind of like badass or whatever. Or maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I don't know. Or, you've got your LGBTQ plus flag or got like, well, even, you can put like the symbol of like a wine glass in a beer mug together and advertise a store,
right,
as well. So I guess looking at, maybe not just religion, but spirituality, outside of the critiques of, say, religion or spirituality,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, the critiques of like the Disney-fied versions of these different spiritual systems as well, because a lot of the critiques are attacking very elementary notions of religiosity, like fundamentalist, literalist takes, and that's really low-hanging
Well, you
fruit.
can even
Once
say,
you get into Meister Eckhart and you get into the
mm,
mystics of Christianity or any other wisdom tradition, it becomes a whole other animal.
yeah, well, you could even say, when Marx, I believe it was Marx, it was, the, what is it? Religion is the opiate of the masses. That's an opinion based through the postmodern paradigm.
Hmm.
Whereas, uh, others would say, particularly the religious, that, actually, religion is the food
Hmm.
of the masses, nourishment of the
Right. Yeah. Well,
masses, which is,
Einstein actually critiqued that point of it being the opium of the masses when he was talking about his fellows in academia and science, and how they had, in their grudge against religion as the opium of the masses, could no longer hear the music of the spheres. He's like, you guys missed it. Like you're
mm,
critiquing a surface level thing of the fundamentalist, literalist take on something. You're not critiquing the deep essence,
yeah.
and you're missing the actual sacred that is going on all around you at all
Yeah,
times.
and I don't think we can necessarily blame that on, like, say, like postmodernism, because it was happening in modernism when we
Modernism, oh yeah,
became highly
actually, that's
materialistic and highly
exactly right. Yep.
scientific, and like, well, we can,
We can measure things very
yeah,
accurately now, and then all of a sudden,
yeah,
modern religious people started to think that, oh, well, facts equals truth, um, facts of how things are made, and and so they started to make the mistake. They made a move that might not have been the right move, and that actually we're going to go over that as we cover these gentlemen here today. That point comes up.
hmm
That's a great point. So let's see where we're going next. Okay, we're going to look now at the transition from traditionalism to modernism. How do we engage with traditional literalism and mythological thinking? Very important for our times. Let's go.
Pick up on all that. It's like a lot seems to hinge on this notion that mythological language uses a metaphorical framing for ideas, and that seems to be sort of this life raft from traditional mythological thinking to make that sort of transrational move. Is that something that you think is I mean, is that how you would kind of would you assent to that framing of that idea? And yeah,
Yeah, I would assent to it, but I would expand it a little.
yeah, please
Whereas
do.
there's a tendency in, let's say, modern rational scientific society to think that these other people use this metaphoric language. And I think that's kind of a false idea. I think it's a byproduct of the fact that we don't train it, right? We don't ask kids to draw a picture of war and tell a story about what he did. However, like if you were talking to John Vervaeke, he would insist that metaphor is a much broader phenomenon than we normally think of, that all of our perceptual assessments and our basic cognitive and conceptual functions are in fact metaphorical. The notion of meaning is a metaphor. So it's not like there were these metaphorical people and we've moved on and need to appreciate them. What we need to appreciate is that metaphor is a much broader category than we thought, and it's here with us, and we have to treat it um, with the richness that they treated theirs with, even though we're looking at a broader set of metaphors.
So
Hmm.
where do you think the literalism comes from today? I mean, I tend to equate a lot of the the extant like fundamentalisms with that sort of traditionalism. I tend to think of it as sort of you know, they kind of go hand in hand. Um, I come from a conservative evangelical background, so a literal understanding of the Bible and its inerrancy and all that sort of stuff was really important. Um,
Mm.
and yet, there's an interesting way also in which it's the case that literalism is itself an invention of modernity. That sort of precisely the ways in which the misunderstanding of metaphorical language, poetry, myth, kind of after modernity shows up in these different ways of knowing, or sort of more thoroughly, explored. and empiricism and observation and whatnot, that like now there's this sense that, oh, there's like, it's almost like modernity invents literalism.
That's a really, really good point there, isn't it? So there it
Yeah.
is, just like you were just saying. So certainly modernity, our capacity to now really start breaking things down and create empirical, statements, understandings of reality, brought us into this mind state that we needed to justify our spirituality in the same frame.
Yeah,
And,
like if like if the Shroud of Turin isn't real, then the story of Jesus was a lie or something like
Mhm,
that. And it's
mhm.
just like,
And then
well,
yet now you have to believe literally that there was a talking snake and this and that kind of stuff too in the Bible.
yeah,
Instead of recognizing this is deep, deep poetic truth.
yeah.
It's metaphor that is telling us about how to be in reality, not what is reality actually made of, but it's teaching us how to be and why,
Well, and
which science can't do. So that's where spirituality and philosophy come in.
well, say, okay, like here's an example. Like if you're teaching somebody science and it's a really complex idea, say like the atom, well, we
Mhm.
make a metaphor for the atom. It was the constellation model, which is
Right.
what most kids are taught, which, you got the center thing and out around it, you have
Yeah,
these
things that,
orbits
like
of the
orbits,
electron
yeah.
around it, kind of like a planet. And while when they're teaching you how the planets move and all that stuff, they might make a physical analog,
Mhm,
analogous device to it, but that still in and of itself is a metaphor.
It's just a metaphor.
And
Particularly with the atoms, because it's a probability matrix instead of actual orbits that the electrons are doing.
yeah, and I don't want to like misunderstand Vervaeke, but I think what he's getting at with his view on what metaphor is, it's like everything we observe and how we observe it and come to understand it is through metaphor.
Every word that we say is a metaphor.
Yeah, really, the word
literally,
apple
yeah.
isn't an apple.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the food. Everything
No.
is pointing at something.
Yeah. So, and this idea of the rationality out of modernism of the modern world, and to ration is to separate things aside and only so much and the
Yeah,
right amount in the
here,
right place, and
this
ration
here.
this out and
Yeah.
ration that out. In the past, before the modern age, there was definitely the idea of like rationing things and being somewhat rational, as we would colloquially term. But during the modern age, there was such a shift in our abilities
To break down reality and understand it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and have actual tangible effects.
Oh
Well,
yeah. Proof that
yeah.
that the stuff we were figuring
Well,
out was working.
when we-
Microwaves, planes, trains, automobiles. And
yeah, when we
whatnot,
came
yeah.
up with the when we came up with the steam engine, we had the ability to put power of hundreds of horses
Mhm.
into a machine, move way more than we ever were able to before.
Yeah. So
know.
science and the materialist movement was powerfully affecting for people. And then we started making this mistake of saying, well, everything in the Bible is absolutely true, exactly word for word, as we comprehend it now, when the way people comprehended it probably 2,000 years ago was much more in line of something like poetic truth, which Brendan and Layman will go on to describe now.
And I think whether it's the Bible or any like really old story or book, you lose quite a bit of the many layers of meaning
Mm-hmm.
within the text. If you just only take it literally, it's just the literal meaning.
Right. Yeah. You're not reading what's between the lines. What is that sentence pointing at, or that word actually
Well, and
pointing
even
at
like
that's
say,
deeper?
if you look at the Bible, Jesus used metaphors, parables,
Mm-hmm.
and be like, well, I'm going to make you all fishers of men.
Yeah. Or
Not literally, they're going to go out with their nets and grab up people and be like, you're going to worship Jesus. But no, like, I'm going to have you go out there, gather people together, get with other people, scout out the areas, go send yourselves to the far flung reaches of the world and
to
gather
be fishers
people,
of men.
to be fishers of
and
men.
faith is
know.
like a grain of a mustard seed. And
Yeah.
it's just full of metaphors. Yeah.
Because that's how we understand it. Like,
Mhm.
the best way to encode long-term information is to make a good story.
Absolutely.
And it used to be all verbal, like, before we had literacy, or I don't want to say literacy, but the ability to communicate on, and not in words. Everybody had, like, the people who were the storytellers had to remember everything as best as they could.
Yes.
And then would elaborate on it and add to it the more they gleaned from the story itself. 'Cause the more you know a story, the more you can
Rich it.
participate and enrich
And
the story.
yeah,
It's kind of
participate. That's right.
it's kind of like lore for like, your favorite sci-fi or anime or,
Right, yeah.
whatever, where there's
Yeah.
this back lore and people make up, the beta canon that's not really canon, but it's like
This is like the lore for a living life.
Yeah.
It's giving you more of an orientation, more of a place, more of a home in
Yeah.
this reality.
yeah,
It,
but-
it does indeed home us and protect us from that sense of homelessness that we can get. What was that called? In
Domicide.
Domicide. That's right.
Domicide,
And the
yeah.
Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. Shout out John Vervaeke.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's jump back in here, and they're going to finish this explanation out.
So you could go so far as to say, and that then it gets kind of misapplied backwards, so that people look at their myths and say, oh no, this literally happened, when maybe 2,000, 3,000 years ago, the very notion of literal truth wasn't as separated from poetic truth. Do you think that's the case, or how would you sort of articulate the relationship between like current fundamentalisms and the literalism, quote unquote, that they employ in looking at their texts and their beliefs?
Yeah, that's a really deep question, and I think there's a couple elements to it. Like, there is an element of what I think of as traditional culture, which is unproblematically absolutist, right? They go, this is an unerring document, and what they really mean is they want you to make a gesture of loyalty. Just like they want you to say your mother's a wonderful mother, or they want you to affirm any of the other folk symbols in which we live, because being part of a nation or an ethnicity or a religion, part of it is just going aside from your personal feelings and demonstrating fealty. And they're not really rational. They don't have an argument about why 100% is 100%, right? They just want you to make the gesture. You go on, you say, just profess your allegiance to Jesus and you're in. Great. No problem. It's inactive. So I think that can be done in a healthy way or an unhealthy way in terms of that cognitive style. But I don't think it really, the unhealthy way is always going to be a little bit destructive, a little bit hardened, a little bit contracted, a little bit over reified, the way unhealthy versions of anything are. But what we see in the last couple hundred years is a sort of retroactive effect from the relationship between modernity and traditionalism. And I think where we see it most is where the traditionalist views themselves through the putative modern lens that they see as dominating the society. And the way I would think about that is, we often think about traditionalists as very fixed, but they're actually quite mutable. Like today's American Christian does not believe what Kierkegaard was taught or what they were taught in the 800s in Rome. It's very fluid, but it takes a little longer. It takes a couple generations. If I'm saying what Grandpa was saying, then this is what we've always believed in this community. So there is this adaptability within the traditionalist. And the adaptability, I think, takes over generalized virtue claims from the society as an element of the thematic symbolism of our team. If our team's always hearing that science is good, and we might hear that for 100 years, then we go, you know what? Symbolically, science is good. Therefore, we're scientific and they are irrational. So now I have this idea, even if I'm totally irrational, I just use science as a way to demonize my rival ethnicity or the anti-team.
Wow.
So I think there's a way in which those people take on scientific factualism, the desire to get the facts right about the world. Go, wait, facts are important. I've heard that facts are good. My team is inherently good as my loyalty stance. Therefore, my team is inherently factual. Therefore, our mythology is a fact. And I think that's a weird move that didn't necessarily happen in the ancient world, that only happens when you get the dominance of modernity.
That's such a good point. Okay, yeah, that was a weird move that couldn't have happened before. But once you now have science breaking things down to their constituent parts very exactly and then resulting in incredible inventions, these arguments start to become commonplace.
Yeah.
We almost can't help ourselves because we are growing up in a modern world, and we think that hard fact means truth, but there's a lot of different kinds of truth. Science, like we said before, can certainly tell us what things are made of. It cannot tell us how to be in the world. That's the place of philosophy and spirituality.
Yeah, so there's this two sides of a wrong coin happening here. There's this idea of the literal myth, like your myths must be literal, and not and then there's the poetic truth. You
Because
know,
we're not saying that the
because
myths aren't true in a certain
so
very profound and important way.
what we want to say is literal truth and poetic myth, but you have to look at poetic truth too and literal myths as well. Because like okay, that's a bad way of putting it, but there are to go on. There are healthy and unhealthy, proclamations. Like right, like the traditionalists, like this is the way we've done it, and this has worked best for us. But then a few generations down, it morphs and it mutates and it changes naturally. The unhealthy would be to not change and only do this, and it's blinders versus like growth lubrication, right? So like the healthy way of these proclamations is like, well, of course, yes, your mother's a wonderful person and your kid's the smartest and all this stuff, and that's okay. That helps ease social interactions. Or like say, today's conservative now is definitely not the conservative of 40 years.
Certainly not.
But some of the beliefs may still be there. Like, like the religious Puritan nut job has been scorned asunder to the point where what we call religious nut jobs right now are actually like, like hippie by comparison. So I'd call that like a traditionalist mutation. We go through that. The one problem I see with science, scientism, would be, well, because we can show things with facts, and mind you, facts aren't necessarily truth.
Right.
Truth. You can use facts to then lead you to a truth, or at least lead you away from an untruth. Like we have a bunch of facts about like, how gravity works, electromagnetism, all that stuff, but that doesn't give us the truth of the universe.
No, it doesn't tell us.
We're further away from the untruth that, we're a flat, a flat plane with a firmament above us, and, and everything's moving around us, but we still don't have the absolute truth.
We still don't know what gravity actually is. That's right.
And we've heard, the term "trust the science." Don't you trust the science? This proclamation of, well, we've got facts, so we're definitely right.
Right.
Whereas I think, before in humanity, super
science is supposed to challenge itself, though. They forgot about that.
Yeah.
Part,
Well, yeah. But before in humanity, there was a lot more room. Like, yes, we believe this and everything, but we don't know, and this is all we got, so we're going to keep doing it. Whereas now with science, it's like, well, no, we've got some concrete stuff until it gets proven.
I think before
wrong.
we instinctually knew that when we're telling stories, there's a deep, deep truth that these stories are teaching us. We're not supposed to just literally believe word for word that what the myth is telling us happened exactly as the myth. The myth is telling a deeper story about how to live, how to be in life as a person, as larger communities. So it's a metaphoric tool.
Well, and you can see societies that have gone too far down the take their own myths too literally. And what is it, the Aztecs or the Mayans who would, cut out the hearts of sacrificial people and roll them down, the pyramid steps and stuff like that because the gods demanded blood.
They had to like kill an adolescent virgin every week kind of thing to keep the storms away.
Because their snake god, their snake dragon god needed it for the fertility of whatever. And it's like, well, that didn't do them very well, did it? Constant warring and kidnapping your neighbors and killing your own people didn't work very well. And then, well, the diseases that came when the conquistadors came, but still. And well, you can actually see it in say even more modern American communities, like the super ultra Puritan communities that didn't grow, and they got outmoded by something else that was more flexible than they were. And we're going to see this with the sciences now, particularly since they're like, believe the science, but then, biological males are the same thing as women is absolutely absurd and non-scientific. And what we're doing to children and all that stuff is absolutely absurd and not scientific.
And to
so
women in
we're
sports
seeing
and
it's
so forth.
breaking. And now we've got people that are scientists who are approaching science and the scientific method, but are also combining the other end of our existence, which is immaterial, the spiritual end, and that's outmoding just the pure, only looking at scientific fact.
Fair point.
Yeah, scientific Puritanism. Well, if it's not scientific, I won't believe it. It's just like, well, then you won't be believing much because Yeah, science can explain a lot of things in the material world, but it can't explain. Well, actually, it seems like a lot to us, but I would have to say that we're probably not even into the percentages level yet of how the universe actually works with science. Like you can't put a 0.00000 or 0.0000001% to how much we actually know about how the universe
Oh,
works.
neuroscience even is still in its infancy.
Yeah, and yeah, we map the human genome and we can do it for pretty cheap, but that still doesn't tell us how it all works exactly.
No.
And,
We
you
know what gravity does. We don't know how it works.
So there's always going to be a.
We know we have consciousness. We have no idea how it works. That's the big one.
And I'm not saying get rid of science. Actually, it'd be nice to take the scientific process and bring it into the spiritual process as well.
We got to remarry sacred sense of spirituality and scientific inquiry.
Well, if say you're a
They
young,
should be working together hand in hand.
and say if you're a young person trying to figure out who they are and get in touch with the spirit of themselves, you should probably take a pretty scientific approach to it. You come up, you have just this idea, and you form a hypothesis in ways that you can test it. And if in real life what you're doing and what you're finding actually works and leads you to a better life, not just this, hold space for yourself and all the hollow stuff, but actually really feels like it's working, then you have a theory. And then you got to go further into it and try to disprove your own theory of spirituality as well, because this has already been done. How we have Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, all this stuff is because throughout human experience, we've been doing this and seeing what works and what doesn't.
Oh, yeah.
And what doesn't work usually gets outmoded by something that does work. Not all spread of religion has been through conquest and force. It's been by people questing and trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
And back when we were really separated, tribes of people, the pagan era where the entire planet was pagan, there was no idea of Abrahamic religion or anything. They all had their own different little beliefs that they're trying to figure out what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
And they would send a wise man up to the top of the mountain to watch the skies to figure out what's going on. And it was this mystical thing, but really he's watching cloud patterns, miles and miles away, and which literally that's what he's doing. But in the poetic truth end, he was going up high and communing with the gods and getting understanding, the nature.
Very
gods
well
at this
could have
point.
been,
Well, if you see the
going for days without sleep, and then he had a kind of a dream that gave him a sense of premonition because all of his intuitions from everything he's noticing in his environment came together and spoke through a dream.
And if that's all you know in the world is how to observe the world through that lens, yes, you are literally having that experience, or not literally, actually. Having that
and there might be some supernatural things that can happen too. I've had a dream that was a premonition of something that happened. It was unbelievable how accurate it was to a T. It was the exact thing that happened to me in the dream happened 2 weeks later in real life. And maybe I'll tell this story sometime, but it's a long one, but it's crazy. I never believed this kind of stuff could happen until it happened to me, but that doesn't mean I necessarily believe in all kinds of new agey psychism stuff either. I'm very much quick to critique these kinds of notions because I think a lot of them are just people trying to entertain themselves or find some kind of sense of meaning.
Hey Ninja Bat.
Yo, Ninja Bat, what's up?
You mentioned facts aren't truth. WTH.
There are specific kind of truth.
Well, there can be a true fact.
Where they point to,
like the world is round, it's hot outside or cold outside, but that fact in and of itself does not incorporate the entirety of the truth. Just because I know the planet's round doesn't mean I know exactly how everything came to be to make the planets and make everything. And when we're using truth, we're using the word capital truth, opposed to like, yes, this fact is true because we can prove it without a shadow of a doubt, or it hasn't been disproven yet as being true.
I like how you say science has lost humility, Ninja Bat. That's a great point. All the kings were chosen by God, right? Yeah, that's what.
You're poking us for the first comment, but I'm glad you brought it up because that is, while I was saying it, that does get confusing because I do believe in get as much fact as you can if you're going to say make an argument or try to find truth, but just because you have facts doesn't necessarily lead somebody to the truth either.
Yeah, it's and hang tight with us, fam, because we're going to get there. All is going to be answered in this episode.
Well, as much as
about as thoroughly as it can be in an hour and a half or so. So yeah, let's. I agree. Yeah, there's Kim. Hey, what's up, Kim? Welcome. Yeah, I definitely feel like premonitions happen in dreams as well. It
Oh,
has happened to me.
I've had a bunch of them.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
happen, man. There's something very weird about that. That we should do an episode on sometime and just
yeah.
talk about get back into the subject of lucid dreaming as well as just dreams in general. Because what a
Well,
strange thing.
Vervaeke mentioned something in his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series.
What a mouthful, right?
Yeah, that
We're so used to saying this now.
he was talking about like psychics and stuff like that. And he wasn't really saying like psychics, oh, they can like tune into this other thing or whatever, but they're very, very, very good at seeing
Connections,
non-salient connections that other
Patterns.
people can't see.
Yeah,
And that would be like with the premonitions, if we remove the it's just magical or mystical and actually look into it, it's like, well, we're actually pretty good at seeing patterns and having intuitions about things that we're not even paying attention to, because the vast majority of the information going into your ears and into your eyes and into your hands and the way you feel gets ignored by your surface level, but doesn't get ignored by the rest of the brain. So there's something to it. Brain is a fascinating piece of machinery that life has come up with.
It'll give you premonitions that you don't even have any evidence for either that end up being accurate, which is the really like what is happening there. But yeah, you're right. Intuition. I think that's most of what a lot of these palm readers are doing.
Yeah, and
just really high level pattern recognizers.
Yeah, and Ninja Bat, it's connected to the source. Well, everything, I'd say everything's connected to the source, but I definitely believe our minds, not just the brain, but the minds are definitely connected to what we would call the source, even if just mechanically, which I don't necessarily believe. But
yeah, I see what you mean there. That would be a cool episode. Yeah, thank you, Kim. And I see what you're saying there, Ninja Bat. And I think our subconscious works with premonitions. I agree.
Yeah,
yeah. It's saved me too. Right.
Well, dude,
Yeah.
how do you
Amen,
hit,
Kim.
how do you hit a baseball that's coming at you, that's coming faster than what your brain should be able to perceive what it's doing, and you're still able to hit the ball? Because your brain is having a premonition before the ball leaves the guy's hand to know where it is. So, more often than not, the really good guys that are good at it, they hit the ball.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
You trust the flow. You let go. You don't think, and then it works.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go ahead and look at one last little clip between the conversation between Layman Pascal and Brendan Graham Dempsey here. I just wanted to say it's hilarious that we are trying to put Layman Pascal's thoughts into layman's terms.
Yeah. And he doesn't speak in layman's terms.
He does not, man. How do you get that name, Layman?
Pascal's contradiction, we'll call it.
All right, here we go.
Saying.
Well, and I like the way you phrase this too, because you talk about a sacred style. And so again, on the topic of sort of these pragmatics, so you say, and again, this is from your Future Faces of Spirit, presentation, monologue, sermon, what have you. You say this all
Future Faces of Spirit, if you guys want to look that up.
Depends on you, speaking to the audience. It depends on you to live more sacredly and to participate in the sacralization of your existing civilization. And that means, among other things, that you must take the risk of good faith toward the meaning of spirit. You are responsible for conceiving of the religion that you can feel good about. And if there is something I've left out or something you've not heard, then I urge you to add it in your version. Don't be passive. Don't let other people define religion while you sit back like a movie critic and decide whether or not you will click the like button. Be proactive.
Click that like button.
So speak a little bit to this embodying the
for
sacred style, because I feel like a lot of this it's precisely these issues of like we have this capacity or proclivity to look back and we say, oh, people used to be sacred, they used to be doing all these things, but now that it doesn't work. And it seems to just kind of take enough people just being like, no, I'm going to embody the sacred style, fads, trends, expectations be damned. What is the sacred style and what does that look like? And
I think he's talking about an orientation, a way of being.
And how can we do more of it?
Yeah, that decision to just go for it, I think, is part of the metamodern ethos, right? The new naivete, so to speak. And what you were talking about there, it's got
that even in the face of impossibility and the knowledge of all the ways that we could fail, we're still actually going to try and do the right. I like that informed naivete that he speaks on here.
Two aspects. So one of the aspects is the art and the science, the technique of sacralization. And the other side is being active or passive relative to concepts, terminology, things like that. Right. So religion is a good example of a problem we have, which is we're too much like a TV audience with all of our terms. We go, well, I've heard people using the word religion and I don't like those people. So therefore,
Yeah.
I don't believe in religion. I'm atheistic. Right. And I want to say to them, why, if you think they're idiots, why did you let them define the word? Why did you accept their definition? Why didn't you say, oh, because I think you're idiots, therefore that's not the definition of religion. I will define it in a way that is up to my standard.
Yeah, why not?
And if everybody did that, the standard would advance.
Yes, yeah.
So there's an element of
Brilliant.
sociocultural linguistic passivity that we've all sort of inherited. And maybe this goes way back. I think Heidegger says somewhere that language is withdrawing itself from us, right? That we're not really functioning as the active agents anymore. And we need to take that role back. It's not okay to go, those people use it that way, and all I have to do is react against that. No, you have to take that word and give it your best meaning, not try to come up with some other word or explain to me why that's the wrong word for them to use. Take that next step, that post-deconstructive step.
Yes, get into a constructive state.
Give it its full meaning as far as you're concerned. So that's on the one side. The other side is, what are the arts of sacralization? And again, the shamanic is a place where we can study that at kind of ground zero, right? Long before any of the elaborate religious traditions get involved. People living in a campsite with each other are figuring out in a very basic way how to do this. And we still get that. If, right, a couple of people take peyote and go out into the woods, they're going to rediscover some of the sacralizing arts. You pick up a feather and you're like, oh, look, guys, this feather, right? It's full of more than itself.
Man.
I think it's super meaningful for some reason, right? And it sounds dumb and it sounds unformed, but it's the authentic roots of what this process is. How do we come together in a way where we can perform visceral experiences that make us feel that we and our relationships and the things in our world resonantly contain more than they appear to contain?
That's so good. Love that. So how do we imbue meaning back into our use of language? We have to deeply feel into the metaphors that have been used by these wisdom that came before, so that we can rescue the babies from the bathwater that we threw out.
Yeah, and I like this, the way he put it. It's like, basically, why would you accept this other idiot over here's definition of this word and say, oh, well, I don't believe in it.
I don't believe
It's
in
like,
religion
well,
because those people over there I view as stupid. Well, why don't you come up with a better definition of
yeah,
religion?
well, craft your own definitions. And I've been trying to do this for a while on like words. Like I have a hard time using certain words now because of, well, the quote unquote idiots who have been changing them. Like an easy one would be like, diverse or diversity, right? That has completely been smashed into some crazy,
just
unrecognizable
diversity of pigment, like skin pigmentation, rather than diversity of thought and ideas. Now it's like, well, yeah, we were trying to get all the pigmentations together in the already.
So
but now you're saying that all these different ideas are not allowed.
Yeah.
That's wild.
And sometimes you don't even have to like come up with some new concept for the word. Like, take the word equity, another one of these words that you hear all the time.
Yeah.
Let's go back to actually what equity means.
Yeah.
There's the financial sense, which is, a balance between your assets and your liabilities, and whatever that is. If it's at zero, that's perfect equity. If it's more towards your assets and less towards your liabilities, that's where we want to be. That's the positive end of it. And not use it
interchangeably with the word equality.
With the equality. So sometimes it's just stop using the word the way the quote unquote idiots would use the word, and use it and rediscover what the word was.
Right.
Now, sometimes you might have to come up with new ways to use words. And sometimes you need to come up with new words. English is great for that because we can just smash stuff together.
Metamodernism is a great example.
Right. And then
and we're not here proposing, and then our next clips we're going to actually demonstrate that we're not proposing a new religion or a new philosophy here. Actually, what we're trying to do is create terms and definitions so that all of the different wisdom traditions can now come into more concrete conversation and actually start moving forward together.
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the most important things when having discussions, particularly on more complex things, is the initial agreeing on terms. Like, what do terms mean? So you're on the same. Particularly if you're debating with somebody, you need to state what your terms mean. Make sure your interlocutor understands the terms so you can use them properly.
And especially since we're trying to also remarry science and spiritualism. Well,
Yeah, and then this art of the sacralization. He mentioned the taking some piety and going out in the woods, but then doesn't necessarily need to just be like that. But finding the connecting forces in all things. It's interesting he brought up the feather because, and he said there's more in this feather than what it is. It's like, well, this feather is there's the practical applications you can do. You can put them together and you can make a fan, or you can use it as something to remember somebody by. It is the thing that helps the bird fly, so it has maybe some power of flight in it, or a reminder of flight, or in the literal, like as in literature sense, the poetic sense, you can use the feather and the qualities of a feather to describe things. Light as a feather. I feel light as a feather, or the way she moved was light as a feather, and stuff like that. And that multiple meaning layering is a very sacred thing that's what shamans were doing when they
Seeing in a
were
wider scope.
donning the headdresses and dancing around like
Yes,
that. They're not literally the freaking wolf,
No,
but they're showing
they're
you the
imitating the wolf.
movements of the
Yeah.
wolves to get a point across. That's much
Yes.
more than just the guy
How to
in the
hunt
wolf
the
skin.
wolf, how to
Yeah.
be wary of the wolf, how to
Yeah.
protect yourself,
how to understand
how to
the
hunt
wolf.
as the wolf. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and those were the first steps to our development of what we would end up calling religion. And we can regain them, and not necessarily in a way to go back to religion. I think that just will naturally happen anyway, but in a way to get back to what religion does for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a unique,
Revitalizing that sense of the sacred and
Yeah.
bringing us back into communion, back into a co-creative dance with the source.
yeah, we're in a very unique time
Boy, are we.
species where we're completely separated from one of the most important factors in our I want to say civilizations, but our grouping as individuals and furthering of the species. The mystical, magical, spiritual, religious aspect has been with us since pretty much the start.
It knits us
And-
together. It gives us a sense of meaning, belonging.
but we're in a way in a period of time where it's like, well, we don't have time for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I know,
mumbo
but
jumbo.
it helps
That's
us understand what
BS.
is valuable and important and what
sure.
we need to focus on together communally. So,
Yeah.
how can we figure out how to solve the myriad crises that our species faces? How do we clean the oceans and the water of the microplastics or this or that without congregating in?
Why would we care? Why is the reason why we care?
Yeah.
It can't just be like, well, because I like living in a clean
Right.
place. It's like, well, your place is
well,
probably
value
clean
is
enough.
relative, so, you might not like it, but hey, some people don't want to clean the ocean. So
it's because we care about the next generation. Why do you care about the next generation?
Yeah, why are they
Well, because
valuable?
I want them to live good lives. Well, why do you want them to live good lives? Where does that come from? And it's not just a base material thing.
Yeah, that's right. So we're going to go into value now with developmental psychologist Zach Stein, who Brendan has also brought on to his Metamodern podcast. And boy, does this one go deep. This is so good. So first, we're going to jump into understanding the work that Zach has been involved in and the book, First Principles and First Values, that he released last year. So let's go ahead and let's jump on over and let these guys kind of take the reins. Roll.
And the simplest way to say it is that we are trying to find a way to revive the project of perennialism. So this is an evolving perennialism. And perennialism, of course, was
Turn the speed down here, guys.
Sorry,
This is
guys.
kind of fast. Let's bring them down to 1.1. See if that's bearable. Guys, if this is too fast or you want to go faster, we can do that. Whoa.
the project of trying to figure out what all the world religions had in common.
There it is.
Like this core of perennially recurring wisdom from the wisdom traditions. And Ken Wilber kind of climaxed that tradition and then constellated the postmodern reactions against it. And so what we're doing is factoring the postmodern reactions against perennialism and re-articulating it in terms of an evolving set of first principles and first values. And so in the broadest sweep of things, what we're doing here is talking about the nature and future of religion and talking about the nature and constitution of the cosmos, and specifically trying to re-ontologize value as part of the cosmos. So you can think about some of the work that was done in kind of philosophy in the 70s and 80s, trying to make consciousness real again, which is to say, like, okay, we got so reductionistic and materialist here, guys. We have to talk about, does consciousness exist at all? So you get like Chalmers and all these people, this whole thing about consciousness. And in a sense, that's very interesting, but consciousness just kind of sits there. It's just like, whoa, 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 right? But what about like telos? What about value?
Yeah, like a goal, an aim, a direction. That's telos.
And so McGilchrist most recently has said that the universe is probably made up of matter, time, space, motion, consciousness, and value. That those are the basic pieces you need to get the thing going. And so we agree. And so do the lineage traditions that we're pulling from. We're re-articulating much of the wisdom traditions as actually conversations about value and intrinsic value, the evolution of cosmic value. So we speak of a field of value, the way that one might speak of the physical fields that constitute the kind of gross material universe. And we speak of a universal grammar of value as a context for diversity. And what that means is that we're not prescribing a particular list of values. What we're trying to do is resuscitate our ability to have a non-arbitrary discussion about what's valuable.
Okay, let's give them a break here. We got a couple more minutes on this clip, but real quick, guys, if you're interested, he's referring to Ian McGilchrist. This is his book, The Master and His Emissary, which posits that consciousness and value are fundamental to the nature of reality.
Well, that would make sense.
Incredible human being. This guy's amazing.
Well, that would make sense, like, in the Judeo-Christian creation story, because, there's, the creating of all things, and after the creation of each thing in turn, God would say, and it is good. Well, that's a value, right? And then when God created man in this story, it was very good, which is a value higher than just the good value of the things. So at the primary moment of the creation of the universe was a value to it. And then if you go into the New Testament, when was it? I forget which part, but basically there was God in the Word, and the Word was with him and was him. And that was a relationship value and the first instance of love, the self falling in love with the self, but not in like the egotistical self kind of way.
Right.
And that was a value. And I'd venture to say, if, you read pretty much any sophisticated religious text and their creation story, there would be a value set within it as well. Maybe it's a fighting a dragon creation story, or maybe it's the grand mating story where the sun and the moon came together and created this. But there's always a value, and and there's what little kids do. Why? Right. But why? But why? Well, value sits at the very end of all the whys.
All the whys. And those whys are wise questions, even though they're treated as though they're not. Yeah. They certainly are wise questions.
Yeah.
So to define a set of first principles and first values that helps us to talk about together the nature and the future of religion, the constitution of the cosmos, and most importantly, to re-ontologize value as part of the cosmos, to make value recognizable as something like fundamental,
Yeah. And this is,
or at least transjective, meaning that is both objective and subjective, the result of something that came long before.
yeah. And this
That's
would,
primordial.
this would be what the metamodern philosophy is trying to get at, right?
And so to re-ontologize, that means well, ontology is the study of the nature of being and of reality.
So bringing spirit back into the study of being
reality,
in the nature of reality.
So remarrying science and spirituality. And then telos once again is goal, purpose, and aim and end. An inherent aim, or the ultimate functioning of a thing is its telos. Like the telos of a seed is to grow into a plant, for instance. So here I'm just defining terms to make sure you guys can follow this too, because some of these guys you got to listen to twice. Some of the points that they make to really grab every little detail, so it all makes sense. They also bring up the term techne, which is a craft, an art, or a skill, a practical skill that's honed to the level of excellence.
Yeah,
and it's tied to virtue as well.
It has the same roots as technique or technology, which technology is just a series of learned techniques.
Right.
We tend to think of technology as stuff, but it's actually actions, the ability to do things.
Yeah. And if you guys hear any other terms that you don't recognize that you'd like us to define, we can do that pretty quickly for you. We got grok candy if we don't know the terms ourselves as well. I know some of y'all don't like grok because you think you're not supposed to like Elon Musk, but we're not going
But hey, if you don't like it,
going there today.
Come up with a better AI. If you don't like the AI those idiots made, come up with a better one.
Or a better car, or a better neural brain interface, or a better tunneling system, or a better worldwide satellite system that gives everybody access to the internet, no matter where they are.
Yeah, Skynet.
Come up with a better way, fam. Yeah, right. Well, we'd want someone that hopefully has good intentions to be instantiating these things rather than those with totalitarian, authoritarian tendencies.
Vervaeke has brought up, the necessity for a wisdom AI. If we're going to go into an AI future, that's what we're going to need,
wisdom
frankly.
into AI, because what we're developing right now are extremely intelligent but potentially very foolish systems.
Sure. Well, that's
that'll know a lot of stuff but not understand the repercussions in the ways that humans can.
Well, that's getting us back to the facts aren't necessarily truth.
Yeah.
Right. It can have all the facts, but can it glean truth out of the facts? The facts may be true, but that doesn't get us to capital T truth.
Yeah. Can it only imitate our value orientations, or can it even make its own? I think it needs to be self-aware.
Well, and if it does make its
emotionality to be able to do that.
If it does make its own, is that going to be true?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a scary thought too.
Yeah.
Hey. All right. So let's go ahead and
what a time to be alive.
Let Zach finish out his thoughts here in this section. Let's go.
And as an educator, this is you don't get to square one in education without having a place where you can have a non-arbitrary discussion about the nature of the good life. What does it mean to have a life that hasn't been misspent? What does it mean to have a good life? It's the most basic educational question. And we're in a culture now where most conversations about value are presumed to be arbitrary.
Ooh, yeah.
Not that they don't matter. It just kind of only matters to you. And you can kind of have your own opinion about what's valuable, but I could have my own opinion. If we disagree, that's okay, because values are relative. Of course, if we disagreed about how to build a house, we'd have to resolve that disagreement because the rules of the physical universe are not arbitrary, but the rules of value seem to be arbitrary in our culture. So we're saying that's incorrect, that the law of value, the grammars of value, are as real as the physical laws, and that we can, through intersubjectivity and intergenerational engagement, actually evolve and deepen our perception of value, our encoding of it, and articulation of it. And so this is kind of the first word on moving the perennial tradition into this conversation about value and refactoring things like non-duality, theology, evolutionary spirituality in terms of this conversation about the nature of intrinsic cosmic value and our ability to perceive and to relate to it. And that opens a whole bunch of doors, which we can kind of start to walk through. But that's maybe one pretty good.
So that's interesting. The idea of value being arbitrary, that's not his idea. It's the modern idea. It's,
postmodern idea, really.
Modern and postmodern.
Yeah.
I would say probably started with modern era because we got some mechanical. Well, that idea that value is arbitrary, it will prevent us from asking important questions. Whereas if you treat value as like a fundamental, now you can start asking questions hopefully the right questions to lead you to even better
And
questions
you can start
and better
orienting
understanding.
large
Yeah.
groups of people together, and we can
Yeah.
share an aim, and we understand deeply the value of that aim. So we're together. And
It's like adding an extra layer of focus to it. It's like, well, it's good that we know.
and reason for your focus.
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. So it's good that we know that the laws of the universe, as far as the physical laws, are not arbitrary. You know, like if you keep a structure within its, if you keep a structure's center of gravity within its footprint, it won't fall over, right?
Mhm.
Good. We can design off that. It's great. We can ask questions. How can we push this so we can make it look crazy without it actually falling over? Great. That's only one layer of focus. You could go even further. Is what is the value of this building? What is it adding? What does it do? And that's where
Mhm.
you get like beauty and architecture and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And well, coincidentally enough, we're in an age of almost a repulsion to beauty.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and,
yeah.
and maybe that has something to do with the arbitrarization of value. Like, well, what's the value of beauty if it just works?
Yeah.
You know, well, you're comfortable, aren't you? Why do you need to live in a beautifully crafted house? Why can't you be comfortable in your little pod?
Yeah. We rarely
You know.
uplift and inspire through architecture the way that we used to.
Oh man,
Yeah.
dude, like,
It's just, four straight walls and gray building nowadays.
and maybe you'll
that's
get
most
like,
of them.
yeah, maybe you'll get like some ungodly modern or postmodern art piece that's put up there on one of the gray walls, or
Yeah.
you'll have
Or
an
every once in a while you get like a
wall.
Dulles airport or something like that. That's
Yeah.
actually kind of a cool design. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
so,
we don't do that very much anymore. And those projects used to be 200-300 year projects to build an incredibly intricate, ornate cathedral, for instance, or temple.
or even the Empire State Building that was built even in the modern time. It was still built to be impressive and look
Still
good,
have some character to it. I
have some
guess, yeah.
character to it.
Yeah.
But now it's like, it's just glass boxes, which
Yeah.
mind you can make some really beautiful, stunning glass boxes. But for the most part, we're just throwing up the glass boxes as quick as we can and just a big
We're
basic
certainly
shape.
not building to pull people into transcendent states anymore. Like when
Mm-mm.
you walk in through a cathedral and you go
Yeah.
through layers
Well, it's like the
of
difference between
increasing intricacy and beauty.
a modern Protestant church, which is comfortable and it's big and it's kind of like a theater
It's got
and
room
whatever,
for everybody. Yeah.
versus going into like an old school like cathedral
In
or-
France or Italy or something
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
or even if it's not a cathedral, but like an old church that
Mhm. It's just beautiful though.
Yeah.
Outside and inside.
well, and even the
Yeah.
sound.
You can feel the love that's
Yeah.
put into every single particle of that building.
Well, and we used to build architecture to have a quality of sound, a value of sound as well. You'd sing in it and it would resonate out and reflect, and it would give you that like, oh God feeling.
Mm.
That's one thing I actually really do appreciate about like Arab mosque stylings. They're dome shaped, and the way they're built actually really resonates sound really well and
Mm.
creates this very voluminous effect.
They are cool. Yeah.
Like, you can speak on one side of a wall and somebody on the other side can hear
you.
it coming back
Yeah.
down and stuff like that. It's really, really, really cool. And the Arabic language is actually a tonally alive language as well. So like the vowels that you're using actually create cymatic responses matter.
Whoa.
Whereas English is like a tonally sonically dead language.
Mm.
Like Hebrew.
And that
Arabic
Hebrew
and-
matches up with math too, like the
Mhm.
way that they wrote
Yeah.
the
So-
Old Testament.
Well, there's value in that. And I don't think it's just a subjective my truth, your truth value. It's something when, no
Different
matter
kind
who
of
you
value,
are,
yeah.
even if you're an atheist, when you walk into a cathedral, you can't help but have that that wow
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah, that sense of wonder is going to
Yeah,
hit you
yeah.
on some level.
So
So now let's look at let's look at how we can honorably critique and forcefully respond where needed when we are regarding these previous modes of interaction with reality, modernism and postmodernism, so that we can restore value and meaning as fundamental aspects of the cosmos, bring meaning back into our worlds. Let's go.
So you kind of frame that very well. I'll read a quote on page 119. You say, "We are engaged in what we understand to be the great postmodern project, the reconstruction of value itself, honoring both these legitimate aspects of the critiques of modernity and postmodernity, carefully and forcefully responding to the other mistaken aspects. In doing so, we seek to restore the value that was always there, but not in its pre-modern condition." And so people who will
Right.
know,
And so
You can't-
that's just to set us up
yeah, and
for this next part.
you can't go back. Like that's the thing is like you can't go back to the pre-modern traditionalists.
It's impossible for us to.
We're
Yeah,
not
even
there.
if we wanted to. Yeah.
We're not there anymore.
No, we're past it now.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we need to get rid of all of it.
Yeah, well, we are in a postmodern world now, and so what is the next thing that's going to come? And it needs to be something that's all inclusive in the best sense of that word, and that it recognizes the values that were useful and helpful in traditionalism, modernism, and postmodernism. So we're rescuing the babies that we threw out, but we are also still going to honestly, but with good faith, critique uh, where these different movements aired. So yeah, so let's go. Let's
And
go
the
ahead.
key word is honestly too, being intellectually honest about it.
Amen. Yeah, I agree.
Because one of the reason why we've gotten ourselves into this pickle is intellectual dishonesty. So when we're making arguments about things, we're not truly actually steel manning it. Marx wasn't steel manning mercantilism and religion; he was straw manning it.
Right.
And
Yeah, he was.
and not just Marx, but the new and old Hegelians,
The
Hegel
postmodern,
himself.
Yeah,
So
that whole postmodern movement.
that being honest about what we're doing and being like, okay, well, hey, I don't really like postmodernism much, but there is some stuff that they were actually getting at.
But actually trying to
that,
dialogue
that
in
had
good
some
faith.
truth to.
Yeah. Let's just not see the other as an enemy and other them completely.
Yeah.
Let's actually say, okay, well, let's work together to figure this thing out. You know, just take that side by side orientation rather than this oppositional orientation that we always take with those with whom we disagree. Let's try and figure it out together. That changes the game entirely. All right, so let's go. Let's look at value as eternal, as an ontological primitive.
Logical or a metaphysical primitive. On page 199, you say value is eternal in the sense that it is sourced beneath and beyond space and time. I mean, there's a very metaphysical move that's going on here that is positioning value prior to what in some senses we would think of as the naturalistic cosmos of space-time and the physical universe, almost, that there's a metaphysical ground to this. So my question is, how is that different from a pre-modern notion of value, which you say you're trying not to do? You're trying to move beyond the postmodern critique, which really does foreground the social constructedness of value, and makes us kind of appreciate the degrees to which value is relativistic and changes cross-culturally and these sorts of things. So unpack that a little bit to someone who is sort of like, okay, great, we're looking for a postmodern approach, and then they hear that value is posited axiomatically as a metaphysical primitive.
Okay.
And by primitive, he means like prime, like
Primordial,
before. Yeah, not primitive as in like lesser than in stupid. Like we tend to use the word primitive.
An original aspect of the universe.
Yeah. And the postmodernists,
so it's built into the universe.
We're right
default.
in the sense of value, or something that we call value does change depending on who, and there's a subjective quality to it.
Yes, but
it goes further to say, exactly. It's not only a subjective thing, that there is. It's outside of space and time.
It's also an objective thing that's beyond and before space and time.
It is there regardless of whether everything else is there. Is what I think they're getting
part of
at.
The primordial essence, so to speak. Yeah, it's there. It's been there since the beginning.
Well, there's got
since the Big Bang.
Well, there's got to be a reason. Why did the universe come to be? For what purpose did it?
I remember asking that question. That was never a valid question. You know, that's not a scientific question. You can't.
Well, it's because you can't have. Because if you're looking at it, if you're not applying valid as a constant, then it just doesn't make any sense, because it's like, well, basically it's like, why the universe unfold and become? Well, it just did. That's all we know, because that's all we can really.
It just happened. Something
explain.
Came out of nothing. Yeah, that's our best explanation, which isn't scientific at all, of course, either. So, and we're not trying to dismiss science. We're just trying to bring science up to speed to match with and be able to marry back into a relationship with our philosophies, with our spiritual understandings of reality, get them back into that dance together.
Well, a good scientist should be okay with occasionally just going, I don't know if I'll ever get to that point of knowing why.
Yeah, science will tell us what is, but it's not going to tell us what that means. That's the place of philosophy and spirituality. So
it only tells you what is when you go look for that. What is.
Yeah.
You're not going to know anything about gravity if you just take it for granted that things go down.
Yeah. All right. So get ready, fam, because now we are going deep. Let's go back to Zach and Brendan.
Totally. So I think the first thing I would say is that modern science itself simply posits things as axiomatic primitives. So it's not like modern science is a practice that does not depend upon the positing of axiomatic metaphysical primitives. In fact, this is how you get a discourse going. So just the fact that we posit that doesn't make it somehow pre-modern. So for example, the Einsteinian constants, like the speed of light, gravity, the existence of gravity, all the stuff that has to be in place for the Big Bang to exist, for the microseconds after the Big Bang to bring order. So the idea, in fact, that there are cosmological primitives which express themselves across cosmological timescale through processes of self-organization and things of that nature is a profoundly modern idea, but it does rely upon the positing of certain basic primitives, So that's the first thing I would say is that, and again, as McGilchrist is arguing, if you start to look at the most deepest places where even physics is occurring, you start to get people positing consciousness, for example, as just a cosmological primitive. And so again, I don't believe that therefore they are regressing into pre-modernism. They're doing what science does, which is say, okay, everything about the universe is suggesting to us that actually it doesn't get started without something like this being there kind of already. And so that's the claim we're making about value, which is that it is it's not that it isn't socially constructed, it totally is. So like space and time are real, and yet we also construct space and time, right? And so similarly, value is real, but we also construct value.
Yep. And okay,
Time is real, and you can misgauge the time. I don't have enough time, actually. I thought I did. Value is real, and you can misperceive value. I think that's valuable, but it's actually not.
Okay. So let's cover another definition real fast. He used a term, axiomatic metaphysical primitives. This is where things can get confusing. So axiomatic just means self-evident, obvious, already is unquestionable. So modern science also posits these kinds of explanations without even realizing that it's doing it half the time, which is so hard for us humans to catch ourselves doing.
Well, and you have to in order to have a discourse in science, like when discussing the arc trajectory of an ballistic object, you have to assume the constant that is Earth's gravity if you're doing it with it. And, that is, okay, we're just take it as is.
Well, it also has axiomatic metaphysical primitive notions. So it's making assumptions about the ultimate nature of reality and how it began, and it's given a sense of certainty to the claims.
Well, sure, like the idea that no energy can be created nor destroyed.
Yeah.
Like,
we
haven't gotten to the point where we can absolutely prove that without a doubt because it hasn't been disproved
but
yet.
We take it as an axiomatic, almost metaphysical primitive.
And when he was talking about consciousness as one of these primitives, if you will,
or fundamentals,
fundamentals, we could think of the way we would usually think of consciousness is as an emergent phenomenon because of the interactions of other things it is. Whereas this mode of thinking is, well, it doesn't emerge out of it. It can be expressed through an emergent phenomenon, but it itself is a fundamental is a fundamental. And then, and
there's different schools of thought on that, and they actually get into that. Because Vervaeke comes from a more transjective stance, and I think that Zach is actually positing as something like a fundamental that comes through the relationships between different things. That's where value comes from. It comes through relation.
Yeah, and
but relationship is fundamental.
Well, to the universe, bring it around back to the material. There are some people playing around with the idea that gravity isn't a constant force in the universe; it is an emergent force. Even though for all the math that we're using, we can think of it as a constant. It may change from here to there depending on how fast you're going or how much mass you have.
And the law of emergence is another one of those big questions. We do not know why things emerge the way that they do in this universe.
Yeah, why when two atoms get together, they form into the shape of a molecule, and then when the molecules get together, they encode information that leads to life and different kinds of life and
Different
all
kinds
this
of
stuff,
cells,
you
and
know.
different kinds of organs, different kinds of organisms. Yeah.
And then what does that drive to
Yeah. Why
go?
does the universe seem to have
Why
an
does it?
appetite
Why
for
does it want a
growth?
life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why does the universe want a life? It
Yeah.
seems to have a value
Yeah.
orientation somehow.
What's the value of life?
Very strange. So let's go deeper. Let's keep going. Go ahead, Zach.
Right. So so I think so that's one thing. The other thing I'll say is that we're consistently trying to rationally reconstruct the most advanced scientific discourses that we can find. And so the Whiteheadian metaphysics,
In the writing of the book that we introduced, or that he introduced in the very beginning of this episode. So he wrote this book with a couple other individuals, but they did so. What do you call it when you write under a pen name? It's
Pseudonym.
David something Temple is the name of the
Yeah.
author on the book, but it's really Zach Stein and a couple other gentlemen that wrote this book together.
which kind of a Whiteheadian style of
me go
metaphysics,
back a
which
little
Charles
bit here,
Sanders
guys.
metaphysics, scientific, consistently trying to
So we're trying
rationally
to.
reconstruct the most advanced scientific discourses that we can find.
Hmm.
And so the Whiteheadian metaphysics, which kind of a Whiteheadian style of metaphysics, which Charles Sanders Peirce began, which he talked about as a scientific metaphysics, is a way of doing metaphysics that doesn't retreat back beyond the Kantian innovations that gave us modern post-metaphysical thought, but actually builds on that and moves forward by orienting generalizations across all of the best existing scientific fields, and then interanimating those with the rationally reconstructed philosophical primitives. So I'd say that's the other thing I will say is that we're doing something like a scientific metaphysics, where the basic practices that allow us to be speculative are grounded in the non-speculative disciplines who cannot justify their own findings. Which is to say, like, science isn't philosophy of science. Philosophy of science is philosophy of science. Science is
So
science.
science is not the philosophy of science. The philosophy of science is the philosophy of science. Science can't do the philosophy part. The philosophy of science needs that part.
And so science is, by definition, unreflective, non-ontologizing, non-speculating about what it's finding. And so then the philosopher comes in, Whitehead.
Yeah, it's
and
not
Habermas.
supposed to speculate on what it's finding. It's just supposed to figure out what the constituent parts of any individual thing that we're looking at actually are, and then coming up with some understanding of how to operate from that. That's philosophical.
Non-speculating about what it's finding. And so then the philosopher comes in, Whitehead, and Habermas believes this is one of the roles of philosophy, is to look at the special sciences and actually rationally reconstruct what they actually mean for the life world.
What they mean
so
for the
that
good
is,
life,
again,
for
a
the life of the individual
postmodern
and the people.
speculative metaphysics, which isn't denying science, but in fact is saying, okay, science, here's what I believe you're actually saying. Not science is wrong, there's something else that's more true, but rather science is partially right, but is by definition limited in its ability to make metaphysical claims and even to justify its own practices as valid. So therefore, science stands in need of philosophy, and specifically cosmology and metaphysics. So that's a little bit of the way we're framing some of our claims.
Yeah.
So it's science. Science is a tool. Is a multi-tool in ways where it can do multiple things, but it can't do everything.
No.
And you should
I
probably
can't say what its findings mean to the life of human being.
Yeah,
That's the place of philosophy and spirit.
And to use the language we've been using for this episode, it's not finding value. You know, the wrench doesn't find the value of the drive in your nice car. It doesn't find the excitement of it, but it can sure help you to get that car tuned up to then have the experience and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I think
it can even give you values as far as numbers and measurements, but it cannot tell you what they mean in context of relation with living a life as a self-reflective being on a living planet in the midst of an infinite cosmos.
2 + 2 = 4, but like
regardless of where you are, though.
Well, but 2 what? And 2 what? And then 4 what?
Yeah.
What for? What for?
What's the 4 for?
Yeah. So yeah, it's and philosophy is a tool as well that handles pretty much what science can't. So I guess, logically speaking, we should be trying to create a merger between philosophy and science.
Absolutely.
and using the philosophy of science to perfect science, get better at science, at using the tool of science, not being so damn proud that, well, we know this now because of this and can't change. And
Yeah.
human history is like the human scientific history has been marked with like, no, we know this now. And then somebody
Stubborn
comes and is
guys
like, actually, no. And
Devoted
they're like,
20, 30
shut him up.
years of
Oh,
their
yeah.
life to figuring something out, and then they find out that they were wrong, and they don't want to let go of that notion.
Oh,
man.
dude, the
You
academic.
can't even consider that they might have been a little bit off on something.
Oh, dude, the scientific
so hard.
academic realm is they're brutal.
That's why
to
we have
each
the
other.
scientific method to counteract and check that propensity for human beings to BS themselves. You know?
Yeah, well, yeah. There's a lot of scientists that.
But it's hard to be objective, man.
The new kid
That's-
on the block
yeah.
gets kicked a lot. We'll just put it that way. So if you have this new idea, even if you can prove it,
Good luck, man.
if
Yeah, you
the
might get
establishment
yourself
doesn't
hung.
like it, you're not going to get published
Yeah.
in anything worth reading.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So now Brendan posits a really interesting question, and he asks, why is value not simply transjective as John Vervaeke describes it here? And Zach has a great answer. So let's go into that. Here we go. Rolling.
But I'm working myself with a more kind of Vervaekean notion of transjectivity, right? And that if you've got something, an entity in a context, let's start with a living entity, because this is a nice place where I think people can see these things pretty clearly, but then we can also shade down or shade up, as the case may be. But like a cell has a goal state, right? In order to maintain itself, it's got to take in, food, nutrients, and in order to sustain itself, it has to avoid toxins, right? So cells do chemotaxis, and we can see goal-directed behavior in the world. With these kinds of complex living organisms. Obviously, when you shade up to the level of complex human beings, now you've got all these other layers of complexity added in. And so our goal-directed behavior is very complex, and we've got will and we've got emotion and all these things. And, here Greg Enriquez's UTalk model can help kind of chart how these things wind up showing up across the evolutionary stack. And then you could even, I think, go further down, shade down into the area of matter and look at things like dissipative structures that have, what Terence Deacon would call like these teleonomic, goal-directed and intentional behaviors. And if you see it in
Crystalline
that
growth.
way, then you can just say that entities to maintain themselves have that as a goal, you can almost posit. And so entities have values because of that. And I think to use a very specific example to really make this clear, right? Well, do I want to get? I might save this. I'll come back to this. There's something I want to get to here about the values that show up for different kinds of organisms, because I think it illustrates the point very well. But the basic claim in this way of approaching the reconstruction of value would be that actually, yeah, physical, let's just say living organisms to start with, have goals in order to maintain themselves. And if things have goals, then there are normative aspects to their existence, right? If they don't reach their goals, then they cease to exist. And so if they are going to keep existing, then they need to meet their goals. So by virtue of it being kind of a dynamic, complex evolutionary creature, it's going to have values that are valuable for it. And that's kind of the key transjective part, that all values are valuable for things. And I guess here's where I'll bring in this last point and then get your response, is that the dung beetle, right? What's valuable to a dung beetle is dung. And you could even just say, for the sake of this illustration, that let's say that's human crap, okay? So for that creature, that crap, that poop is valuable to it. Now, as a person, that crap is not valuable to me. It is kind of, it's like, it's actually kind of my value state is to distance myself from it. So instead of being attracted to it, I am repulsed by it. Whereas the dung beetle is attracted to it instead of being repulsed by it. And because we have different values, but we are operating in what you might call that field of value, generally speaking, because we both seek to maintain ourselves and have goal-directed behavior. And so in that framing, you get that relativity of values, but you also get it framed within a broader context of all entities in context with their environment must have values if they must maintain themselves. And the big takeaway from all that would be, then you don't posit value as a fundamental. It's actually inherently, it's a relationship that emerges transjectively between an agent and its arena. So what do you make of all that approach? And why don't you find that satisfactory as an explanation for value?
Okay, so that was a really good question
Well,
from Brendan there.
yeah,
Go
real
ahead.
quick with so he's talking about down, single cell organisms all the way up to us. There's a goal. Well,
Mhm.
that goal is the value as well.
Mhm,
That
that is,
that
yep.
propagating itself or
That telos means it
continuing
is
itself.
valuing. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that starts as the primary, because then, well, why why go away from poison or go towards nourishment?
Mhm.
Why value the dung?
Mhm.
Well, it goes to, well, the dung, it needs to reproduce, so it
Mhm.
needs big enough dung so it can find a female
The
that
life
will,
wants to keep lifing.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the it's the value of life is life. But even when you go, as you said, shading down to molecules that want to seem to want have this end goal state, creates a crystalline structure,
Mhm.
or even how amounts of energy clumped together to create different quarks up to different, the neutron and the proton and the potential electron, and then you get those that builds and builds and builds until you get
There
things
is
like
this.
lead and gold and uranium and like heavier
Mhm.
substances, or
Yeah. Yeah.
elements. So it still, to me, looks like value is that primary driver.
Yeah. Right.
I guess in this situation, it's like,
Mhm.
yet again, why?
So is it a
Why?
primordial kind of foundational
Yeah.
primitive
Opposed to just emerging from the relationships of two
of
things.
transjectivity, for instance? So there is subjectivity, but there is also objectivity, and there's something that transcends that unites
Mm.
all of them. So that still points to me like something quite
Oh.
fundamental, but it's the result of relationship now. And so let's see
It's
how.
probably a both and.
Yeah, well, I think it is. I
Yeah.
think it is, and that's what I think Zach alludes to here. He explains it very well. So let's go ahead and let Zach speak on this now.
Uh, to well, a few things. So I think it's a false dichotomy to think that by saying something is primitive, it isn't somehow also relational, right? So the idea that value is always value to something, of course,
Oh, that's
absolutely,
helpful. Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, consciousness similarly,
Mm.
right? Like that these are relational by their very nature. So in no way are we retreating to some kind of myth of the given, and nor are we retreating to some kind of essentialism that isn't a process-based contextual way of thinking about the emergence of anything that is actually real. So that's the first thing I'll say, which is that value is always relational, fundamentally. That's why we talk about the primitiveness
Mm.
of desire.
Mhm.
Now, you have chosen to call both value and desire goal-orientedness. But to me, that's just you positing value as primitive, just calling it goal-directed behavior.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what we're saying is that to be goal-directed is to have
Yeah.
values,
Yeah.
basically. And so I'm agreeing.
Okay.
You're using a particular kind of language, which is interesting because it seems to be more kosher scientifically to suggest that goal-directed behavior occurs. But the idea that somehow that actually you just mean the thing has a desire and a need, and therefore value is real. And then, of course, the idea that what's valuable to you isn't valuable to me, of course, that's how values work. So the dung beetle thing, I'm like, yeah, of course. Like primary to all of that, as you pointed out again, a kind of slip of the vocabulary is life, seeking to live,
Mhm.
value.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, so all the evolutionary psychologists smuggle in
Yeah.
this like desire to live, like wanting to continue to be. That is the most basic way of thinking about it, especially in the context of life, what we would think of as value. So like survival, the quest for survival is kind of posited as a primitive given in all of evolutionary biology. And Whitehead was easily pointed out, well, that just is appetite. That is the appetition of the universe. That is desire. That is value. What the ubiquitous, overwhelmingly stressful push to live shows us is that life is valuable
Mm.
intrinsically.
Intrinsically.
And so, yeah, so I'm basically in agreement. I think that, yeah, there's very important ways people consistently misunderstand value, which is that if it's a value, everyone has to hold it the same. Nope. That if it is a value, it some kind of exists like a platonic form in a disembodied kind of weird, stupid metaphysics. But we're not doing weird, stupid metaphysics.
No, that's
We've
so that's
all
very
read-
that's
we've
very
all read
helpful.
That's great. And
So-
that is very helpful. It's so simple.
Something came to mind too. It's like perhaps relationship is also a prime thing.
Yeah.
As well.
I
'Cause
think you're right.
Like
Yep.
if you yet again back to the Judeo-Christian notion of there was God, word, and they were the same thing. Well, it's a relationship. First thing is a relationship, and then all other things come out of that valued relationship. So Yeah, I know this is weird because everything keeps like tying and looping back into itself,
Yeah.
whether it's goals or values or relationship, but they all tie in. And yes, there are how you perceive value is subjective.
Mhm.
Like one man's trash is another man's treasure. Dung beetle likes the poop. Humans want to stay away from the poop. Unless
there
we need
are
to put it
subjective
on
values,
our food to grow
Right.
our food.
Yeah. So there are subjective values,
so
but then there is also an underlying primary way that value is tied in to the relational aspect of the cosmos. Cosmos does not exist without relation either, which you are absolutely correct on. And we get into that, the intimate, intrinsic interrelatedness of everything is very much a part of the book that Zach helped write. So we're going to get into that stuff, and it's beautiful. So yeah, let's see how long have we been going
we've
tonight,
been going
guys?
for about we got 10 minutes late, so we're probably getting close to that time for breakdown.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. We're running a little bit late tonight, guys, and we still have a good deal left. So we're gonna have to do a part 2 on this. Next episode, I wanted to get into the burgeoning movement of metamodern Christianity, which is something incredible that's been happening around the world. A lot of people are recapitulating their understanding and their relationship with this ancient wisdom tradition. And we're trying to rescue some of the babies we threw out with the bathwater and to come up with a less fundamentalist and literalist way of relating with the way of being that Christ exhibited and oriented, expressed for us in his life. And it remains the profoundest of stories. So how can we resuscitate what is
it's literally world changing,
going to help us navigate and reground and rehome ourselves in the world today in this time of meaninglessness?
Yeah, even if you're not religious, or if you're religious and you're not Christian, I think everybody can realize how the world shifted and changed.
And there's
from
some
that
really
story.
good values that
Sure.
Christianity has given us, like the poor matter just as much as the rich, and even the rich are going to have a harder time of getting into heaven than the poor, oftentimes. And I love the idea that everybody has an element of the divine within them that we borrowed in our Constitution. All are created equal, so forth. We've gotten some beautiful ideas from Christianity that even if you're not Christian, you still live by a lot of these value orientations that Christianity gave us without even realizing it. We are steeped in Christian waters here in the West, just as in the East, they're very steeped in Taoist and Buddhist and Hindu ways of looking at things. And both have been beautiful ways for humans to relate with reality. So we're not trying to discount any one wisdom tradition either and have them compete on some level of primacy. We're trying to recognize that human beings have been trying to define and relate through a relationship with the ineffable for thousands of years. And it does give us a sense of home and a sense of meaning. Why did we ever stop wondering about the nature of this beautiful miracle that we find ourselves in? But why did we? It feels like life is so much more meaningful. You remember those questions you used to have late at night with your friends, maybe when you were younger, and you talk for hours into the night about life itself, trying to understand it and wonder about it together instead of just positing your idea versus their idea, like a really shared inquiry. Like, remember that? I remember doing that with some of my friends.
Yeah.
And we've lost that, guys. So let's go ahead and do a quick good news roundup, guys. We're going to start doing this every single episode because there's so much bad news out there. And let's see some of the good stuff that humans are doing together. First off, very, very cool.
Astronauts over in Antarctica.
Yeah, man. Yeah, check it out. So
this might not be good news for the flat earthers, but
yeah,
sorry.
When you open the Ziploc bag,
for the first time, astronauts have circled the poles.
It's very hard to do.
There's a volcano.
Is that why we haven't done it?
Yeah.
I was wondering about
We've
that.
got radiation fields, and then also the direction the planet spins when we're launching and other things. It's difficult. Very rarely do it.
Oh, there's an ice wall.
Right under you. Right
Just
next
one
to
big
you.
ice wall.
You want your hygiene bag as well, Eric?
My hygiene bag?
This is all computer generated.
I can get
Earth
you.
is
Yeah, might as well.
flat.
Just shows you how
Oh, no.
absolutely
Mine is, I think
massive.
mine, I left mine
Birds are
leave it in two.
robots.
You mean just add
I don't
daily
know, man. I've
hygiene
seen
with
some freaky
toothbrush and
birds
everything?
lately.
Yeah, no, I've
Might
got
be
mine
true.
too.
Oh,
I leave it directly
Fascinating,
above my
man.
head.
It must be
I was here in
incredible to be up
2013.
there.
Where are we?
Kanchaka.
Oh, nice.
Gonna zoom ahead
Lots
a
of
little bit here.
volcanoes, huh?
Yeah. Entire peninsula is full of
Wow, man. Wow.
much like Yellowstone in the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
It was discovered in 1940s.
How massive.
Wow.
Very
And then
good
here's the
looking
astronauts
breakfast for
hanging
us.
out.
I can't help but bump into each other in space.
Zero G indicator, and his name is Tyler.
Tyler, yes.
So
Let's
He's tied down.
let's make Tyler.
But you're at the
Facing
South Pole.
toward us.
but,
Oh, yes.
you know,
Make sure Tyler does his sleep survey.
Well, I guess they're doing north to south
They are,
orbit,
yeah,
so
yeah, they
half
are.
the time.
Oh, sunset.
Yeah, don't go into the window.
So I think we just flew over the North Pole, and now we enter the shadow of the Earth. It didn't open cupola yesterday
Those
for
pictures.
Yeah.
smoother adoption of microgravity. But today, after breakfast, we plan to open the cupola for the first time.
Yeah. Other side.
All in like different directions. Wow.
Eric, say hi.
I can't explain how fun microgravity is. Isn't
Yeah.
it good?
The best thing.
But
Like it
are
looks
they in?
amazing in the videos when you see astronauts.
I think they're in the new
in
Tesla
space,
because at one point they
but
say how
it
comfortable
doesn't
it is.
really
Or,
reflect
I'm
the
sorry, in
joy
the
that it
space
brings.
station.
It's
Your
amazing.
food wants you to eat it.
I mean, check this out. Oh, fog, projectile.
How did you sleep last night?
I slept really well.
Good. It was
Yeah, we
so
slept well.
cozy. I heard that you don't sleep so well in space, but I think we all slept extremely well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me
just
too.
kind of
Very
floating
good.
around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was
Before-
nice and soft.
Very soft.
yeah. The first few hours are a little bit weird, but
Yeah.
after sleeping, I feel everything's all good.
I
Quite
feel like
fresh.
You're just gonna get used to like not really having control. If you let go of stuff.
As she turns sideways while she's
Yeah.
talking. Like slowly turning upside down. Only to us though. For her, she's always right side up.
I felt that if I had my head just touching something,
Wow, man.
It's crazy.
It's
that little
just
anchor, it worked
fascinating.
really well. When I was just free floating, it's like, this is weird. Because very rarely are you in bed and you feel like you're in that
Talking
weightlessness.
about sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
So I think even if it's something hard like that, just against my head, I felt I slept much better.
Eric's head also gets velcro to the velcro, so I think he has an advantage.
Let me find some Velcro.
It's all
The interesting thing is flying in polar orbits is I think 60 to 70% of the time when I randomly look out a window, I see white.
Yes.
I know,
Yeah.
I've
yes.
seen.
I don't think
So good.
astronauts on the ISS have this kind of view.
And it's so epic because it's another kind of desert, so it just goes on and on and on
Yeah.
all the way. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
That's why this really is exploratory.
You see the
right?
joy of their
Uh-huh.
fascination on their
Incredible.
faces. How cool, man. They're all experiencing that overview
Oh,
effect,
yeah.
you know?
Well,
Yeah, so we can clip off that now. That's enough.
yeah, hey, good news. Advancements of technology and science do some things that philosophy can't do. We could put ourselves up in the sky in our minds and imagine what it looked like, or we can launch ourselves with thousands of tons of propellant into space and take a look ourselves.
Yep. So here's some more good news. We're finally seeing, sorry, YouTube. I know we're live streaming on YouTube right now, as well as Twitch and Facebook. We will soon be twitching or streaming on Rumble as well. And that's some good news. YouTube finally actually has some competition. It's no longer totally monopolizing the market. It's given a place for people to actually speak freely without fear of getting kicked off the platform for saying things that are actually legally allowed to be said in the US. We have to be able to speak freely to be able to discuss difficult concepts because it's the last resort to violence. So why would we ever try and cut off free speech? I don't know, but so
Yeah,
here
so
we
we
are.
got,
Check it out. Yeah, Crowder #1, Tim Pool #2 in USA as far as political podcasts. So the number one live streams in the USA right now Here it is. If I can get this a little bigger. Yeah, there we
Here,
go.
I'm going to take us out so you can see it.
But
But you got Steven Crowder at the top.
yeah, I don't
and
know who
then,
this.
Then
is.
there's Benny. Oh, Benny Johnson's doing
Yeah,
pretty
he
well.
moved on up. And so these
Uh,
guys are higher than NBC News
Yeah.
on YouTube. So Steven Crowder, #1. Rumble is actually getting into the top 5. Actually, it took the #1 place today. So more people were watching Steven Crowder on Rumble than people were watching anything else on the planet,
Yeah.
Including YouTube and
And-
you know, NBC and all those guys.
So,
I think that's good news. I take that as
yeah,
good
and
news.
regardless of whether you're like, you know, the personalities and stuff that are on there, because I get it. Crowder ain't a lot of people's cup of tea.
Yeah, and even if you
and-
hate Trumpers
well,
and
and
conservatives,
even
we
if you're-
need to have
yeah.
diversity of opinions to
Well,
have deep discourse.
Yeah, and even if you are like more on the farthest left end, I think we can all agree that monopolies are not a good thing. So YouTube being challenged and viably challenged is a lot better for all of us,
Yeah.
really.
I agree. And
So-
we're saying this as two people that formerly and throughout our lives have been quite liberal. I
I'm
would say,
I'm,
you know.
I'm still
I still
I'm still
consider myself
liberal. I'm just
at least
not.
classically liberal. Definitely more on the libertarian spectrum
Oh yeah,
for a long
no.
time. But yeah, you know, you can still be independently minded and recognize where you lean in different directions. You know, it's like Chris Rock said back in the day, you know, when it comes to crime, I'm conservative. And then he says, when it comes to prostitution, I'm liberal. And like, you know, it's a
Yeah.
stupid joke. But he makes a point that we shouldn't be just one thing. Why do we all want to be a part of a gang? Why do you want to be a part of this
Yeah.
team or that team? Think for yourself. Don't, you know, actually digest information before you make a decision and an opinion on it. Don't just take what your tribe says is true all the time because you're used to the often seeming to be right.
Yeah.
Because, boy, has the corporate-owned wing of the Democratic Party been so wholly corrupted and mismanaged. It's just totally veering itself off a cliff right now, and it's very sad to see. You know, we're trying to bring some hope and, you know, understanding back into this world, but we have a political party that's been wholly corrupted by nihilism and postmodern cultural Marxism, and it's a strange blend of ideologies, but certainly it has taken it on.
Yeah, and you know, people change through time. Like I'll admit, I'm more conservative now than I was in my early 20s, but I'm still, you know, believe in a lot of the liberal ideas. You know,
Taking care of our planet
and let
you
people
know,
do
as they will,
as they
yeah,
will, as long as they're
laissez-faire.
not, you know, hurting themselves or hurting other people, and we can disagree on what is hurting themselves. Like I get it, but you know, when I say, you know, I'm a right-wing liberal, because I am, you know, I mean economically, I'm going to define economically right. I think a person's money and how they go about doing things should be as far onto their responsibility as we can feasibly get. And that's what I mean right wing, because there's this idea that, you know, left is liberal and right conservative, and it's like, well, that's really only in the United States and only for this period of time.
Yeah.
You know, because if you really want to get down to it, I'm more in the anarchist vein of things. You know, I don't know if I can call myself a full-blown anarchist anymore, but that is down. So libertarian and far right as you. Even Milton Friedman was further left than a real anarchist. You know what I mean? So,
But an anarchist believes in no systems of unjust authority.
And-
Like
and-
authority
and-
that rests on violence purely and only. It needs to be earned authority.
and voluntary agreements and
Voluntary
relationships
agreements
with
and- yep,
people,
yep.
opposed to authoritarian.
It's a natural distrust towards
Yeah.
governments, which is actually something that our found fathers related
Yeah.
with very much.
Well,
There's
America.
actually a lot of anarchist principles written into the U.S.
Well, in America for a long period of time, like the Wild West was very anarchist.
very. Yeah.
And even, you know, like settlers coming over here, it was
Early
you know,
internet was as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Anarchy is a natural state for humans that.
And a great counteractive force against Marxism too. Like real anarchists are not fans of Marxists, even though nowadays you see
Marxists. I'm like, that's an oxymoron.
It doesn't work. Doesn't work, guys.
Yeah. So hey, good news.
Yeah, okay.
You know, everything and what got us on this tangent. You know, even if you are, you know, left wing Democrat, down with the system and all that stuff, you should still be happy to see that there is competition. And if you don't like Rumble, then get together with some other talented people and make some more competition. Because like the competition they had, like, like Blue Sky and all these other things that tried to be an answer for Twitter and stuff like that are terrible. And they're just a cesspool of PDF files and wackadoos.
And it's an echo chamber as well. Yeah, just like Truth Social is very much probably an echo chamber.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If you look at Truth, like you might get a little bit more truth because right-wing media tends to be a little bit more facts focused
nowadays, which is so crazy to see how that's happened.
Yeah, how is Fox
so crazy.
How is Fox
more reliable than CNN and NBC now?
Yeah, the most
CNN used to be the objective one to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, NPR and PBS actually did a great, and BBC used to be excellent. They used to actually be objective journalists working for them. Now it's just
now what is it?
Ideologically captured parrots repeating the recycled rhetoric of those.
NPR has has no Republican right-wing people.
They have 80 something editors at NPR, and every single one of them is a registered Democrat. That's insane. How can you be an objective journalistic outlet without any balance in your editorial staff? It's insane. There needs to be some independents, some libertarians, some conservatives, and some progressives in there as well. And I'm sure there are a lot of progressives. Sadly, nowadays progressives are quite regressive, but that's another conversation. So let's get one more piece of good news, fam. Major breakthrough in quantum computing. Researchers have successfully developed a new qubit design that boosts stability and reduces error rates, promising faster processing speeds. These advances are being used to revolutionize industries like not just cryptography, but drug discovery. Thousands, millions of lives could be saved, and it goes a little further here. Exciting breakthrough. MIT's quantum interconnect device is a game changer for scalable quantum computing, enabling all-to-all processor communication, solves a key challenge in quantum network design. This innovation could unlock incredible breakthroughs in optimization, drug discovery. And then here's the part on drug discovery a little more. A significant advancement in quantum computing applications developed a novel quantum algorithm that dramatically improves the accuracy of simulations used in drug discovery. This breakthrough promises to accelerate the development of new pharmaceuticals and personalized medicine. So exciting.
So yeah, actually, I think what this is, I may be wrong, but what I think this is they're figuring out a way to quantum entangle two particles, or take one particle and superimpose it over two spaces. So if
do so accurately and reliably.
Well, the problem with quantum computers is if it's a qubit and a little bit of heat or a little bit of radiation or something that comes in, it destroys the information. But if you superimpose it over two positions, if one gets taken out, you still have it in the other position. Stable. I think that's what this is talking about.
Oh, that's cool.
I might be wrong, but I know that's being worked on to solve the problem, because the reason why you have to put a quantum computer in a super chiller and get it down to almost -0,
I think you're right,
is because heat interferes with the qubits, because they're at such a quantum level that any type of information or energy can change the information stored within the qubit.
The algorithm leverages the unique properties of quantum mechanics to model molecular interactions with far greater precision than classical computers. This allows scientists to predict the behavior of drug candidates with unprecedented accuracy, reducing the need for costly and time-consuming physical experiments. It's a major leap forward in the application of quantum computing to real-world problems. And these are problems that would take a normal supercomputer hundreds of thousands, millions of years to even compute. These quantum computers are so fast, it's scary. By significantly improving the accuracy of drug discovery simulations, we can potentially shorten the development cycle for new treatments and make them more effective.
Yeah, and not to mention not having to do human studies in the early phases, whereas you can simulate the environment, the human flesh or whatever it's going to be on these computers, because life is extremely complicated. Even a single-celled organism is so complicated that a sufficiently intelligent enough computer will have to expend a lot of energy resources and take a lot of time to do it. To do the process and do it accurately. So it'll be interesting to watch this, because there are a lot of claims, like, Microsoft has made its claim that it has a new quantum chip. China says it has a new quantum chip. I think we're still in the infant stages, but it is intriguing, and it is good news that we are actually getting substantial, quote unquote, proofs of the concept that yes, it can work. We might be able to get it to room temperature. that's the exciting part, is being able to get these computers to room
To
temperature.
actually function
Because once you
above,
can,
below zero, yeah.
you can have a super mega computer that's even more super mega than the cell phone in your pocket.
Oh, by a trillion times. I
Well,
mean,
and that will actually
the
open
increase is insane.
that'll open up the world for a local AI. So your AI you're using doesn't have to be connected to everything else, and this, it doesn't have to be a
And we're talking
centralized AI.
Much higher level AIs than
yeah,
we have now.
yeah.
Because right now we can't do that.
Like
They can-
your pocket assistant is your pocket assistant,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
shared with everybody else and
Right.
doing that. You
Yeah.
know, so
and you could do that to some degree now with the current AIs, but once
Sure.
those scale up several levels,
I mean,
it's gonna
what
be
was
difficult
it?
to
It
do
was
that at
like,
home.
you know, they're putting DeepSeek on like Raspberry Pis and
Mhm.
running a very basic version of DeepSeek, which
Yeah.
was a hallucinating mess. But anyway,
Yeah,
still.
but they're still largely accurate enough to do a lot of work, and you can have your own tailor-made versions
Sure,
of AIs on your
sure.
home computer, not connected to the internet now. So yeah, but it's going to scale that up to a level that's beyond our capacity to even begin to comprehend. So yeah, damn, this has been beautiful. Thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Meaning Making 101 here on Actuali Podcast. We do this live stream series every Wednesday, 7 p. EST. We'd love to have you come back and join us. Make sure that you hit that like and subscribe and share this show with your friends and family if you enjoy what's happening here. It means so much to us, guys. And your comments mean the world as well. In fact, that helps the algorithm
Yeah.
more than anything, as I understand it. So make sure you drop some comments, some likes, some subscribes. And if you like listening to podcasts, we're also on all the podcast networks. You can find us there. Greatly appreciate
Yep.
you guys being out there and supporting what we're doing, because we're not just trying to, you know, just talk at you guys. You know, we want to figure this thing out together. So we love having
We wanna
people
be in
like Ninja Bat,
conversation.
Kim. Thank you guys so much for always being a part of the
And
conversation
speaking
here.
of which, I've got one from each one of them I'd like to bring up.
let's do it.
I agree, Kim. We have to have a collective intention value,
Mm.
and agree on it, and spend time defining what it is. And
Mhm.
then Ninja Bat, new tech is obvious. It's obviously aliens.
Aliens, aliens.
Yeah. Well, all the new technology we got is just retrograde alien technology anyway.
Yeah, we need the
Yeah.
proper haircut to talk about aliens. You know, yeah, we got to get the freaking thing really big to be able to talk about aliens, right? You got to kind of look like an alien to talk about aliens on it with any level of actual seriousness.
Yep. So
You got to be super cringe to pull it off. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. And I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
We love you guys. We will see you next time. Let's dance our way on out. Oh, yeah.